Is Rachel Reeves a good chancellor, Paul?
A year ago, we all voted for change. Change won in the shape of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and Rachel Reeves as Chancellor. What we didn't know was that change was more chaos, not less chaos. And today, the winter fuel allowance debacle has been reversed, and the government have done this because they've been forced to do this, and they're still trying to justify why they removed the winter fuel allowance by U-turning and still saying that they believed it was the right thing to do to remove the winter fuel allowance. The reason there was a backlash about the winter fuel allowance is because the Labour Party manifesto promised no more austerity. It also did promise to protect Theresa May's Brexit red lines, and it also promised growth. And really what it did was make lots of promises which, when you put all together, are undeliverable. And so something had to give. And instead of giving on the Brexit red line so that we got growth back, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves decided to continue George Osborne and David Cameron's austerity agenda and justify it with a black hole. And the British public have had enough of this. If in 2010, Gordon Brown and Ed Balls had won that election, they had a different agenda. They were of the view that to get out of the recession, the government needed to spend money. But the Conservatives won, and they were propped up by the Liberal Democrats, and austerity was delivered. And the British public stomached it because they thought it was going to sort the economy out. But the British public have learnt that it didn't sort the economy out. They were also promised, the ones that believed in Brexit, the voting Brexit would sort the economy out, and everything has got worse. So they hoped that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were going to be acting in good faith. In truth, I knew that the red lines on Brexit were a barrier to growth and to ensuring the welfare state. And I hoped that they would disappoint Brexiteers by weakening those red lines to get growth back, because that seemed the most obvious thing and the most obvious way of squaring the circle of what they packaged. But unfortunately, they decided to do this gig of a kind of Liz Truss in slow motion and George Osborne justifying austerity, and it's caused them huge problems. Now they've U-turned, and they have now upset another cohort, which is those who think that it's unfair that the elderly have got their winter fuel allowance back and the younger generations are suffering with a housing crisis, huge prices, and debt from being in university, and they feel it's unfair. And what is wrong is that this mess is actually pitting generations against each other, and that is wrong. There's many reasons why we're in this mess, as we've discussed, but another huge reason is because of big corporations like Amazon coming in, fleecing the country and not paying their fair share of tax. It's not because the older generations have got big pension pots and have been lucky to have a house or anything else. We shouldn't be having to look at somebody with envy and say, you should pay more, it's not fair. Ultimately, what has gone wrong is that the big corporations, and we're seeing them now with the tech giants, have been hoovering up huge amounts of wealth. And that means that we haven't had enough tax to keep the system lubricated. And we're now into a horrible situation where Keir Starmer is refusing to move on Brexit, which gives us growth. The black hole we have is largely to do with Brexit, and we're stuck in a horrible trap, and everybody pointing at other people to say you should pay for it. And this is very, very unhealthy for our country and our democracy, and very disappointing. On top of that, we have got the inheritance tax issue, which has been pushed onto farms and family businesses. Again, this favours corporations because these families will have to sell their businesses to pay the inheritance tax, and the corporations will come in and buy these farms, and everything will become more and more controlled by big corporations, and will no longer have that freedom to be able to become a business person, a small business, and get up the ladder. It seems like an end of progress and an end of universalism, which was something that we agreed with the war that we would all contribute to a pot and everybody would benefit from it without means testing, which costs money.
Every year. Britain, like other Western societies, is becoming a gerontocracy. If I were to put it, to be a bit provocative about it, I would say that what this whole winter fuel thing shows is that this is sort of proof that Britain is becoming, politically speaking, a nursing home with a state attached to it. The interest of, because older people are growing as a proportion of the electorate all the time, it is almost inevitable, because of the way democracy works, that politicians are subconsciously or otherwise, bit by bit, re-gearing their interests and what they offer in favour of those people versus a smaller group, which is younger people. And the reason I say, and the reason I'm actually quite disturbed by this winter fuel thing is that I would completely understand if a politician was going after pensions itself, why there would be an almighty backlash, even the triple lock. Because actually, in relative terms, the British pension is not especially generous by comparison to other European countries. The winter fuel thing was the sort of lowest hanging fruit of the kind of pensioner bit of the welfare state. Something introduced by Gordon Brown in the late 90s that, frankly, by definition, we can't have cared about that much as a society, because if we had done, we would have actually uprated it with inflation. It's basically been at 200 or 300 quid for years. It's been depreciating in real terms. There's almost something about the symbolism of this. It's not even really about the policy. It's about the symbolism and the kind of political backlash which has been generated, which is that it is almost the case that no matter how minor a benefit is for old people, that it is untouchable. If we're honest, it has never been harder, and this is true on all sorts of stats, to be a young, and not just when I say young, I'm talking about
up to 40,
people of
really.
working age,
Yeah, absolutely.
working age family in this country, right? Particularly if you've gone to university, your marginal tax rate can be north of 50% at a time when housing costs are incredibly high, childcare costs are incredibly high, and now we're in this crazy situation now where potentially young working age families are going to be working, partly using their taxes to pay for winter fuel allowance for incredibly asset-rich pensions. This is mental.
Yeah, I tell you where I disagree with you. You know what? The government is going after very wealthy pensioners who've got their money in private pension pots, which would have been free of inheritance tax, and that they would have been able to pass on to their children. And the government, and because it's more complicated to understand than the simplicity of the winter fuel allowance, Rachel Reeves is going after that, and that is going to massively affect pensioners. And and I bet you there are going to be other changes.
Yes.
Yeah, rich pensioners.
Yes.
But I think to say that she's not doing anything about rich pensioners because of this change to the winter fuel allowance is to get it wrong. I think the wealthy are going to get absolutely clobbered by the pension changes.
I would make a different, slightly bigger argument, which I think this is something that we've got to address in this country. The fact is that people who are asset rich are taxed, generally speaking, far less than people who are of working age and working for their income. And that is a problem which has got worse, and it's got worse, and it's got worse. And there is a massive discrepancy in the tax system. And I think that, generationally speaking, you've had generations at the older end of things now who had the golden goose. They would have, and not their fault, they lived at a time where generally, on almost every level, they've had it better than almost any other generation. Younger people have not had that, and it is unfair to expect them to continue to have higher and higher marginal rates of income, which prevent them from gaining those assets at a time when those assets of the wealthy continue to be, relatively speaking, undertaxed.
I thought it was very significant that Paul Johnson, who's the outgoing director of the IFS, was asked yesterday on the BBC if he was trying to spend £1.25 billion on a poverty solving measure, would the winter fuel be in his top 5? And he said it wouldn't even be in my top 100. And to your point, child poverty is really stubbornly high at 30%. So if you turn round the whole thing and say not just how do we tax rich pensioners, but what should we be doing to alleviate poverty? Pensioner poverty has fallen to 16% and child poverty is at 30%. So just that sense of imbalance.
Here's Harold. He's one of our bulls. He's a bit sloppy, quite gentle. He likes cuddling. Who's that then?